On today's episode of Locked On Suns, why Mike Budenholzer's introductory press conference here in the Valley reminded me of being in that exact same room in the Suns arena 5 years ago. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Friday afternoon, post Mike Budenholzer introductory press conference. We are free and available everywhere, including YouTube, so hit that follow or subscribe button wherever you're getting the show. Get a new episode in your feed every single Monday through Friday. Become an everydayer and get locked onto the Phoenix Suns every day throughout the offseason and beyond. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, which helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right. So I was able to get to Footprint Center this afternoon for the introductory press conference for Mike Budenholzer. Did feel a little bit like deja vu. Basically a year ago today or so, we were at Frank Vogel's introductory press conference. And yeah, a lot of the things that get said at these events might feel fairly similar. You know, there's only, not one way to be a great head coach, but there's not a million. However, Vogel in 2023 is not the press conference that I found myself thinking about most when I was sitting there listening to Coach Bud and Al McCoy, which was very cool, and of course James Jones speak today. It wasn't Vogel. No, I found myself going back to 2019, which is when the Suns hired Monty Williams. And the reason for that is pretty simple in a nutshell. Mike Budenholzer wants to be here. Truly. And yeah, very similar to back then. Sure, the significant salary and what I would imagine is going to be an investment in his assistant coaching staff and the knowledge of, hey, we as a franchise are trying to take a step forward. Back then it was like, let's build a winner around Book. Now it's like, hey, we kind of got to, put ourselves in position for a championship with this big three. All those things make the job a lot easier to say yes to. It's a lot easier to want a job when those qualities are there than it is one where, you're trying to stay out of the tax and you're going to have to be on the cheap with your assistant coaches and everything else. But Bud wants to be here, and that was very clear. He went out of his way, despite the local ties that he obviously has here, to basically say the reason that he wanted to take this job is the fact that they're so all in, the fact that this roster, this core, is ready to go compete for a championship, and clearly just the opportunity to get back into coaching. And so, he was asked multiple times, like, how cool is it to be back where, obviously he's born in Holbrook, and it's full circle. Al McCoy's introducing him. He's talked on the record in the past about listening to those games in his driveway or in his house, and he talked about being in his driveway with his dad as a kid, practicing Alvin Adams' post moves, and I believe he said Paul Westphal, driving into the basket, the footwork and everything. But he kept returning to, yes, that's all true. Yes, this is special. He had people from his hometown and people from his family in the audience today at the press conference. But he kept coming back to, like, I'm here because I want to take this team and this organization to the next level, And remember, Bud was on the short list initially last summer And obviously before that, he explored this opportunity in 2018. Now, he kind of would have been a goofball, a sicko, a weirdo to take this job in 2018, given that it was as bleak as could be. And he was coming off a great performance as the head coach of the Hawks. 2023, it seems like, he lost his mother and his brother over the course of a little while, and then flames out with Milwaukee last spring. But the time is clearly right. It is, I'm sure, special for him to be here, and the money does help. But the reason that I compare it to Monty Williams, above and beyond all of the emotional stuff and the family stuff, which were big parts of Monty's ethos as well, is I do think when you look at the Lakers and you look at even potentially the Cavs here coming up, and even Milwaukee midseason, I mean, they're not going to bring Bud back, but there are these teams that have had openings. There is a market out there. And Bud wanted to be here. And I do believe him when he says that it's a basketball fit. It is a basketball situation that he likes. I think James Jones, we can talk about how much control does he really have when you're talking about the constraints of working with Robert Sarver. You're talking about the constraints in a different way of kind of ceding the control over to Matt Ishbia. But James Jones, as a salesperson, as a people person, when it comes to these environments, hiring a coach, connecting one-on-one with other executives, with other coaches, with the owners themselves, I think that's his secret weapon. That's what makes James Jones who he is. Booker, who, remember, not only did Bud beat Booker in the finals in 2021, he also beat Kevin Durant in the second round. So Bud had his choice of situations. He had his choice of probably a fairly big payday wherever he went. He wanted to be here. He was ready to get back into coaching. He's clearly lost weight. He talked about how much of a privilege it was to be able to spend time with his kids, especially his son, who's in his senior year of high school. And that's why it feels so similar to Monty. Because if you think back to that point in time, in 2019, Monty had experienced the tragedy with his wife, I believe in 2015, where she passes away in the car accident and everything else. He goes back to kind of his basketball home in San Antonio, works in the front office, goes over to to Philadelphia as an assistant, and then has his pick of head coaching opportunities. The Lakers, whatever else. He says no to LA. He comes here. Bud is in a very similar situation. Leaves Milwaukee in unfortunate circumstances, has the personal grief and trauma that he's dealing with, really soaks in and makes the most of his time away from the grind, and it feels like he's coming to this opportunity on his own terms. Then there is something to be said for that. Vogel had a year off. Maybe you could have made similar arguments, but I think as a human being, that perspective, the deliberate kind of step back and realigning your priorities, your values, what matters, and making the choice to continue pursuing something. And this is going to be a hard situation, a grind. What I feel about the roster and the pecking order in the Western Conference and all the basketball stuff has not changed. I'm not here to be sappy and ignore the realities. This will be difficult for Bud to accomplish. There are roster changes that have to happen, and it will not be a breeze. But to want it, to accept it, to embrace it, there is a big difference between that and just rolling the ball out because you want to. And I would even go back to Monty in Detroit as an example. He clearly wanted to not rush into his next job. Detroit came in with a Godfather offer that he sort of could not refuse. And that Pistons situation doesn't feel like it was ever set up for success. Monty's side, the team's side, the player's side, and it failed. We'll see what Bud provides as a coach, and we'll talk about that as the show continues. But the parallels between 2019 and 2024 for this Suns team are obvious. And last time, they caught fire. They found lightning in a bottle. You have to feel pretty good about what could happen this time. Next, the basketball details of what Coach Bud said. Point guard, the offensive approach, habits, adjustments, all of it. Next. First, today's show brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to help find the right professional for your job faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals using the website, making it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have so many candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate from LinkedIn within 24 hours. Told you before, I'll tell you again, LinkedIn is the reason I have the job that I have today. I was not happy in my past role. It's kind of a sinking ship. I wasn't actively blasting my application out to 1 million places because, frankly, the industry I'm in here in sports media is not exactly the easiest one to find a new gig in. But I was poking around, I was keeping my eyes out, and the best fit I could imagine popped up right there for me, courtesy of LinkedIn. They knew what I was qualified for, they knew what I was involved in, and they said, hey, you probably would be good for this. I looked through it, found all the details I needed, the pay, the hiring manager, whatever, connected with the company, had an interview within days, was hired within a week. Join me, join the 2.5 million small businesses using LinkedIn for hiring by going to linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's keep the show rolling here as we keep grooving through Mike Budenholzer's introductory press conference. This is a choice. This is deliberate. And Bud wants to be here. I said as much in that last segment. But I also said, basketball-wise, this is not going to be easy. So, look, Bud is a pro. He's a vet. He understands, I think, not to to get in front of his skis too much in an environment like this, right? So, partially because of the coming home aspect of this job for him, and partially because he knows how to say the right things, this press conference was a little light on the basketball. But in addition to the press conference, we also had an opportunity right afterward to go do a kind of media scrum of all of us asking him questions after that. And I was able to get a question in, a little bit more basketball oriented, as was David Brandt of the Associated Press. And so I'll start with that one because it's maybe the most pressing. Point guard. Bud was asked his view on this kind of topic du jour, let's say, of do the Suns need that? Do they need a playmaker, whatever? And he kind of brought up both sides of it, right? The organization that you're going to get from having that type of player on the court versus the fact that you're probably going to make yourself even smaller if you have that. And you're going to take the ball out of, logically, I don't think they're getting a point guard better than Book, Beal, or Durant. You're taking the ball out of those guys' hands. You're getting them less involved. At the same time, he made a point of saying, like, yeah, we may need to have some looks where that type of player is on the court for us. But at the same time, we need to have comfort with those times where that player is not on the court. So, again, a little bit of a a little bit of a vet move from a coach right there to not give away the whole game. And he doesn't know what they're going to be able to get in free agency and everything else. So saying, yes, we need that, and then it's July 15th and you didn't get it, and then you look like a fool, you got to be careful. But it seems like everybody is on the same page, including Jones, that if there is an opportunity to get a more traditional playmaker, they will pursue it. In the press conference a couple of weeks ago, Jones was basically putting it the way of who is that player, and is that player attainable? Budenholzer kind of saying the same thing. In theory, it's great. Practically, who is that guy? How much better are they making us? And what are we losing out on in terms of size and other stuff if that player is on the court? I would expect the Suns will come away from this offseason, whether that is making a pick at 22, trading that pick, some combination of that pick and the 2031 pick, and Nurkic and Little and whatever, or in a minimum free agency contract with some form of playable primary playmaking option. I do think there could be players at 22 who we see in that range get drafted every year as kind of that older point guard, right? Not all of them work out, but you think about a Malachi Flynn from San Diego State who's bounced around, had that random 40, 50-point game toward the end of the season. Older point guard in the late first, early second happens. They could get somebody there. They obviously could sign a, DeLon Wright as an example in free agency or somebody along those lines. They could get a Peyton Pritchard or a player like that in a trade. The other thing that I asked him about is kind of with this emphasis that you're seeing on versatility, on physicality, on just high-level two-way players up and down the rosters of the teams that are left in the playoffs, what does he think this roster's strength will be when it comes to winning in that type of environment? And this is not breaking news, but it speaks to his mentality. He said, hey, our strength is still that we have three primary offensive engines who can force the defense into difficult decisions. He said, he shouted out Kevin Durant as a playmaker. He said all three of those star players on this team can bend a defense, force rotations, force double teams, both as scorers at all three levels and as passers. Because the thing is, guys, it's not complicated to get this thing to work. I still think there is a lingering question of what role does Jusuf Nurkic have to play, and does he make sense for whatever the next iteration of this big three type of group is going to be? And we'll see. But you just look at what he did in Milwaukee and how easy they really made it look at times when the Middleton-Giannis two-man game was humming. And it was humming pretty much that entire finals against the Suns in 2021. When both of those guys were at their best, they had great chemistry with one another. They could play multiple ways off of that. Either guy could handle the ball. It's not easy to guard, but it's not exactly complicated, And I expect that, from now until training camp and from training camp on through the season, Bud will be thinking about and working with those guys on ways to get those basic, simple actions revving in a way that unlocks the basic star-level talent that all of them have. It's kind of the bare minimum. They were not able to do it consistently enough this year. I think it's a big reason why Vogel's gone, and even though, again, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think up ways to make that happen, it does take execution and a mentality and some structure. Quickly on the defensive end, the details were kind of sparse there. But to me, that's really because it's going to largely be decided by what else this roster looks like. You're going to need those big three to contribute on defense for sure. There's no way around that. I think Durant in particular and Beal as an option at the point of attack, and Book could, benefit from a step forward back to his recent, prime performance on that end too after a down year. But who's playing center? What are their options at center? What are their options at the point of attack as a kind of smaller player option? How much size can they get with their other offseason moves? Do they have big forwards this year, which they basically did not have this past season? Does Okogie stay? How much does he play? There's too many questions. So I think that's probably why it didn't come up. But the last thing is, Bud said, and this is one of those things that every coach is going to say, but it was music to my ears for a very specific reason, and it had to do with adjustments and habits and kind of that dichotomy, right? Because I've been saying since Bud got hired, maybe I'm already drinking the Kool-Aid, but I believe it. Habits are what win championships. Adjustments are what win games. And Bud emphasized in multiple different answers, we will win a championship if we establish a foundation of work ethic and habits from day one on. You think back to the Spurs where Bud got his start as an assistant to Greg Popovich. What is Pop's he has a bunch of catchphrases. What's his most well-known one? To me, it's don't skip steps. That was a big Montyism, came from Pop. And I think reading between the lines of what Bud was saying, it's not much different. May, calling the players. July, Summer League training camp. September, early workouts. October, training camp. Those are all opportunities to develop relationships on and off the court, make those habits foundational to how this team's going to play and compete, and get yourself on the right foot headed toward the championship that you want to win. I don't believe it more when Bud says it than when Vogel says it. Maybe I just buy the track record a little bit more, but time will tell. Speaking of competing every day, that was the buzzword from James Jones when it comes to the front office and ownership's decision to fire Vogel and make this move in the first place. Coming up, I'll tell you why I think the Wolves series truly led to Vogel's demise, and if there's any hope of salvaging that one particular aspect of where this team fell short. First, today's show brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What makes a championship team is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Closing out the show. Compete. So James Jones said that he heard Bud say in their kind of initial conversations as they were canvassing the league and gauging Bud's interest and interviewing him, the word compete come out of Bud's mouth like 95 times in the course of a few minutes. But it also came out of James Jones's mouth probably 95 times in the course of a few minutes at this press conference. And so I'm of a couple minds on this one, right? First off, this is an area where the fact that the answer from Bud and the hype up of it from James Jones were so similar that deja vu was kind of there, which if you watched this or if you've seen clips, probably you're sitting there like, wait a second, this is like very similar. To me, that actually speaks volumes of this whole situation because Vogel preached it. Vogel hyped himself up as a kind of motivator to get that level of competitive energy out of the team and did not do it. So it's very clearly something that James Jones prioritizes, that Matt Ishbia wants, and that brain trust sees as what is going to get a talented group on paper over the hump. Competitive fire, competitive spirit, rising to a level to become better than the sum of your parts because you just out-will and out-energy, out-compete your opponent. And I don't disagree. It's along the same lines as what I've said about the big three from a mentality standpoint, which is sort of this, that they need to play less like a big three, less like superstars, and embrace some of the less fun, less sexy aspects of what makes a basketball team a team. Help defense, rebounding, passing, pace. Whatever the case may be for any individual part of Beal, Book, and Durant, those things are all sort of part of what it looks like to compete at a high level as a team and outmatch your opponent. At the same time, the fact that it was such a priority, the fact that they didn't feel Vogel met the standard that they want to have here when it comes to competition and competitiveness, I feel like what sealed that fate, what sealed his fate, was the playoffs. Because I think of anything you could say, they didn't shoot enough threes, their defensive coverages might have been a little overextended and panicky at times, or Beal just kind of crapped the bed in a couple games, or they weren't involving Durant enough. There's all sorts of things you could point to. They're all true. Bud will have to figure out how to not come up short in the way that this past year's team did. But similar to Monty overseeing a team that in Game 7 against Dallas and in Game 6 against Denver just looked lifeless, this sweep felt very similar, right? It was, why is it out of hand so fast? Why are these leads? Why did the third quarter get out of hand so repeatedly? Why did guys like Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid and Anthony Edwards feel like they were just taking it to you mentally and physically in a way that, even with their athletic and their youth advantage, just should never have gotten so extreme and so ugly? That spiritual beatdown that they underwent, I think, is what led to the change, and why Vogel's words, I think, rang hollow, even if he said the right things. Now, could we be saying the same exact thing about Mike Budenholzer in a year? Yes, absolutely. I'm not a fortune teller. I don't have a crystal ball here, a little bit out of focus in the front of me on the desk. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong if you think it isn't going to work, or if you feel like the basketball stuff is going to get in the way of whatever amount of competitiveness they can muster. All valid. But if we agree it wasn't there this past year, and we agree it seems to be priority number one when you hear Ishbia and Jones talk about what they want this team to look like, I think a change had to be made. And given Bud's track record of bringing the most out of guys, having those day-to-day habits, that consistently high level of performance, and maintaining the basic essentials of what a Mike Budenholzer team is through deep playoff runs and difficult battles and different iterations of the roster, I think you have to feel good that that aspect will improve here. Is it going to be good enough? As I said, I don't know. As the roster continues to take shape, I think we'll know a lot more about how this team will fit him and what he will need to do to get the most out of it. But when you're taking the 30,000-foot view, demanding that hard-nosed mentality, I do think is what's going to take a super team from theoretical to real. And at least on day one, he seemed to be on the same track as all of us and all of his bosses. That'll wrap us up for the week. Thank you for listening and watching wherever you are finding the show. Don't forget to hit follow or subscribe if you have not already. Back Monday with Brandon Duenas as we get more news and more info. Another front office hire was made that I didn't even have time to hit on, so we'll get to all of that as it comes. Enjoy the weekend, and I'll catch you guys next week.